I am continuing in my reading. What I'm doing in this series is to read through the entire standard works of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. This consists of the Bible, the Book of Mormon, the Doctrine and Covenants, and the Pearl of Great Price. I am continuing reading in a chronological order, according to event, not according to publication or volume, so I'm skipping around a bit as I move along. We are continuing in the Gospels. We are right at the end. We've been reading these last several videos about the crucifixion. We read all the events leading up to it, and now we are seeing the final moments of Christ's mortal ministry. We read it in Matthew and Mark and Luke, and we've even read the Joseph Smith translation for Matthew and Mark, but now we are reading the Joseph Smith translation of Luke. So this is the Joseph Smith translation of Luke chapter 23, verses 26 through 56. In verse 27, which is corrected to who? In 28, instead of Jesus turning, it is, but Jesus turned unto them and said. And then verse 29, instead of that never bear, it is which never bear. Then verse 31, we have this. And if these things are done in the green tree, what shall be done in the dry tree? This he spake, signifying the scattering of Israel and the desolation of the heathen, or in other words, the Gentiles. See, I didn't talk about this when I was reading in the King James, but this is Christ prophesying that the Jews are going to be scattered. When he says, but if this happens in the green tree, what will happen in the dry tree? The green tree is Israel, the living tree. What will happen in the dry tree of the Gentiles? If Israel is going to persecute me, is going to kill me, and is going to turn against you, don't think that going among the Gentiles is going to be much better. And that's what he's talking about here. The Jews are going to be scattered and persecuted by the Gentiles. And that happens for the next 1900 years. The Jews have been a persecuted people ever since they crucified Christ. And that's what Christ is prophesying here. Verse 32, instead of other, it is now pluralized, others. In verse 34, we have the clarification here. Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. And then in parentheses, meaning the soldiers who crucified him. So again, we're not talking about the Jews, we're talking about the Roman soldiers. In verse 35, they take out the word him, so it's just also with them derided, saying. In verse 36, it is now just and soldiers also mocked him, not the soldiers. So in verse 39, we have it rendered this way. And one of the malefactors who was crucified with him railed on him, saying, If thou be the Christ, save thyself and us. So instead of which were hanged with it. In verse 40, it says, Instead, dost not thou fear God? It's just, dost thou not fear God? We just switch the words. In verse 48, that is corrected. Say hi. My son wanted to say hi again. Wave. Wave. You gonna go now? Verse 48, we correct that to who. And in verse 49, it is now, and women who followed him from Galilee. In verse 50, we now have, and behold, a man named Joseph, a counselor, a good man, and a just one. Kind of cleans that up, makes it more grammatically correct. In verse 51, we remove the parentheses, and it now reads, The same day had not consented to the counsel and deed of them, a man of Arimathæa. Verse 52, instead of this man went unto Pilate, it is he went unto Pilate. Verse 53, instead of laid in a sepulchre that was hewn in stone, it is which was hewed in stone. And verse 55 corrects which came with him to who came with him. Now, I haven't talked about Joseph of Arimathæa in any of my other readings, and just briefly here, I might say a word again when I read John, but when it says he was a counselor, this means he was a member of the Sanhedrin. Now, Luke states that he did not give his voice with the rest when they condemned Christ, so he was a member of the Sanhedrin. He was at the trial of Christ, but he was one of the few, if possibly the only one, who voted, not to condemn him. Nicodemus was probably also there. He was also a member of the Sanhedrin and likely also voted not to condemn him, but you didn't need a unanimous vote. So, Arimathea, we don't really know where it was. Some people think it was just a literary device of Luke, but ancient historians do place it in the area of Ephraim, which is a little bit north, kind of between Judah and Galilee, that border area now part of Samaria. So it would have been in the northern part Probably not all the way in Samaria, but in the northern borders of the land of Judea, near the Samaritan border. But that's all we have of the Joseph Smith translation here, so I'm going to leave that here. We will be reading the story again in John, so I will see you there.